A racist police officer unlawfully interrogates an innocent black boy for hours. Later, he is stunned when he hears a knock on the door and sees a man in an expensive suit walking towards him. The cold fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the small bare room. Jalen Harris sat hunched at the metal table, his small hands clenched tightly in his lap. The gray walls seemed to close in on him as he stared at the scuffed surface of the table, trying to focus on anything but the heavy door that had slammed shut behind him. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. The door swung open with a bang, making Jalen flinch. Officer Thompson stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway, his uniform neat and pristine. He closed the door with a deliberate click, then turned his cold eyes on Jalen. "Let's go over this one more time," Thompson barked, his voice echoing in the small room. "Where did you get the bike?" Jalen swallowed hard, his throat dry. I found it," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It was just lying there, near the park." Thompson slammed a thick folder onto the table, making Jalen jump. "Don't lie to me, boy," he snapped, his voice sharp and cutting. "You expect me to believe you just found a brand new bicycle lying around? You think I'm stupid?" "No, sir," Jalen murmured, his eyes fixed on the folder. "I'm telling the truth. I didn't know it was stolen." Thompson leaned forward, his face inches from Jalen's. "I don't believe you," he said slowly, his voice dripping with contempt. "Kids like you think you can get away with anything. Steal a bike, maybe steal a car next, huh? Is that the plan?" Tears welled up in Jalen's eyes. "No, sir," he whispered. "I just wanted to ride it. It looked cool, and my bike is all messed up. I didn't mean any harm." Thompson straightened up, his expression hard. "You think that's an excuse? That you can just take whatever you want because your bike isn't good enough?" He shook his head, sneering. "You're nothing but a little thief, and you're gonna learn what happens to thieves around here." Jalen's vision blurred as he blinked back the tears. His chest felt tight, and it was getting harder to breathe. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to steal anything. I didn't know." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "How stupid do you think I am, kid? You really expect me to believe that? Or are you just lying because you don't want to get in trouble?" "I'm not lying," Jalen's voice rose, desperation creeping in. "I swear, I found it. I don't even know who it belongs to." The officer slammed his hand down on the table again, making Jalen flinch back in his chair. "Enough," he roared. "You think I've got time for this? You're wasting my time with your lies. Tell me who you were working with. Was it a gang? Did someone tell you to steal that bike?" Jalen shook his head frantically, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "No, sir. I wasn't working with anyone. I'm not in a gang, I promise. I just saw the bike and thought." "You thought what?" Thompson cut him off, leaning forward again. "You thought you could just take whatever you wanted and no one would care? That no one would notice some punk kid riding around on a stolen bike?" Jalen's words stuck in his throat. He felt like he was sinking, like the room was swallowing him up. His mind was racing, but he couldn't find the right words to say. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a liar. But nothing he said seemed to matter. Thompson straightened up, his expression a mixture of anger and disgust. "You're just like all the rest," he muttered, shaking his head. "Think the rules don't apply to you? Well, you're about to find out how wrong you are." He turned and walked to the door, leaving Jalen alone again. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the sound of Jalen's ragged breathing. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, staring at the closed door. He didn't know how long he'd been in there. Hours, maybe. He was tired, hungry, and scared. All he wanted was to go home, to see his mom, to explain what happened. But every time he tried to speak, Thompson's harsh voice cut him off, twisting his words around, making him feel like he was shrinking into the hard metal chair. The door opened again, and Jalen's heart leapt. But it wasn't his mom. It was Officer Thompson, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. He sat down across from Jalen, setting the cup on the table with a slow, deliberate movement. "Look," Thompson said, his tone softer, almost coaxing. "I know you're scared. I know you don't want to get into more trouble. So just tell me the truth, okay? Tell me who you're working with, and maybe I can help you out." Jalen's mouth went dry. "I told you, I'm not working with anyone," he whispered. "I just found the bike. I didn't do anything wrong." Thompson's eyes hardened. "Fine," he snapped. "You want to play it that way? Then you can sit here and think about what you've done." He stood up and walked out, leaving Jalen alone in the cold, silent room. Jalen stared at the door, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to make them believe him. All he knew was that he was scared, more scared than he'd ever been in his life, and he didn't know if anyone would ever let him go home. As he sat there, Jalen thought back to earlier in the day. The sun was shining bright as Jalen pedaled down the street, the warm breeze ruffling his hair. He rode his old, beat-up bike through the quiet neighborhood, feeling the familiar creaks and groans of the rusty frame beneath him. It wasn't much, but it was his, and he loved the sense of freedom it gave him, zipping down the empty streets with no destination in mind. "Watch out, Jay," his friend Mark called out, laughing as he narrowly avoided colliding with Jalen at the corner of their block. "Got you," Jalen grinned, swerving to the side. Mark, riding his shiny new bike, pulled ahead effortlessly. Jalen's bike wobbled as he struggled to keep up, the chain clicking and catching with every turn of the pedals. "Man, you need a new ride," Mark teased, glancing back over his shoulder. "That thing's about to fall apart," Jalen chuckled, trying to keep his balance. "Yeah, I know. I'm saving up, though. Gonna get one like yours, watch." They rode together, laughing and joking as they made their way toward the park. It was a good day, the kind Jalen wished would never end. He and Mark hung out for a while, shooting hoops and talking about the latest video games. But Mark had to leave early for his cousin's birthday party, leaving Jalen alone in the empty playground, his bike leaning against the metal fence. He was about to head home when something caught his eye, a gleaming brand-new bicycle propped against a tree near the edge of the park. Jalen's eyes widened as he took in the bright red paint, the thick tires, and the shiny black handlebars. It looked like the kind of bike you'd see in a commercial, the kind he'd dreamed of owning for years. "Wow," he breathed, walking over to it, almost afraid to touch it. He looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and claim it, but the park was empty. It was just sitting there, unattended, like it had been left behind. Jalen hesitated, his heart pounding. He knew better than to take something that wasn't his. His mom had taught him that since he was little. But this bike, it was too perfect, too tempting. Just one ride, he thought, just around the block, and then I'll put it back. He glanced around again, then slowly lifted the bike off the ground. It was light and smooth, the pedals responding instantly under his feet as he hopped on and took off down the path. It felt amazing, like flying. He rode through the park, picking up speed, the wind whipping through his hair. He was just rounding the corner back to where he'd found it when he saw her, a woman standing on the sidewalk, staring at him with her phone pressed to her ear. Jalen's heart sank as he caught her frown, her eyes following him with suspicion. "Hey!" she shouted, waving at him. "What are you doing with that bike?" Jalen slowed down, his stomach churning. I found it," he called back, his voice wavering. "I was just riding it for a bit. I didn't steal it or anything." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be on that bike." "Whose is it?" "I don't know," Jalen said, feeling a lump form in his throat. "It was just here in the park. I was going to bring it back." She shook her head, still talking into her phone. "Uh-huh. Yeah, he's right here. Looks about 12, wearing a blue hoodie. Uh-huh. I'll keep an eye on him." Panic surged through Jalen as he realized she was talking to the police. His mind raced. What should he do? Leave the bike and run? But that would make him look guilty. Try to explain? But she wasn't listening. His feet were glued to the ground, fear gripping him like a vice. "Please," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I just wanted to—" "Stay right there," she interrupted sharply. "I've already called the police." "You're not going anywhere." Jalen's heart sank. He knew he shouldn't have taken the bike, even just for a ride. But now, as the woman glared at him, he felt trapped. He couldn't just run away. That would make him look even more suspicious. But staying felt just as dangerous. The sound of sirens in the distance made his blood run cold. He took a deep breath, trying to keep calm, but the fear was overwhelming. He turned the bike around slowly, looking back toward the park entrance, his mind racing for a way out. Before he could decide what to do, the police car pulled up, its lights flashing. The woman pointed toward him, and 2 officers stepped out of the car, their expressions serious. "Hey, kid," one of them called out, his hand resting on his belt. "Step away from the bike." Jalen's mouth went dry. He let the bike fall to the ground, lifting his hands instinctively. "I didn't steal it," he blurted out, his voice high and panicked. "I swear I found it. I was just riding it for a little while." The officers exchanged a look. "Step over here," the one in front said, his tone calm but firm. "We need to ask you a few questions." Jalen's legs felt like they were made of lead as he shuffled forward, his heart hammering in his chest. The second officer picked up the bike, examining it, while the first one motioned for Jalen to come closer. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Jalen, he stammered, his voice barely audible. "Jalen Harris." The officer nodded, taking out a notepad. "And what are you doing with this bike, Jalen?" I found it in the park," Jalen said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know it was stolen. I just wanted to ride it. I was going to put it back, I promise." The officer's eyes softened slightly, but his expression remained serious. "You know it's illegal to take something that doesn't belong to you, right?" Jalen nodded quickly, tears stinging his eyes. "Yes, sir, I'm sorry. I didn't think, I just thought—" Before he could finish, the second officer spoke up. "This bike was reported stolen earlier today. he said, his voice cold. You're coming with us. Jalen's eyes widened. But I didn't steal it. I swear, I just found it. The officers exchanged another look, and the first one sighed. We'll sort it out at the station, okay? Turn around. Jalen's heart plummeted as he felt the officer's hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward the police car. He was frozen, numb with fear and disbelief. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. But it was. The officer's hands were firm but not rough as they cuffed him. And before he knew it, he was sitting in the back of the police car, staring out at the park, his world spinning out of control. The woman was still there, watching from the sidewalk, her arms crossed. She shook her head, as if she'd known this was going to happen all along. Jalen looked away, tears blurring his vision. He didn't know how everything had gone so wrong so fast. He just wanted to go home, to be back in his room, safe and sound. But home felt a million miles away, and he didn't know if he'd ever get there again. Jalen snapped back to reality as he sat alone in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his small body hunched over in the hard chair. The minutes felt like hours as he stared blankly at the bare walls, his stomach growling and his mouth dry. He had lost track of time. Was it still daylight outside? He wasn't sure. The room had no windows, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the echo of his own heartbeat. The door swung open abruptly, and Officer Thompson strode in, a grim expression on his face. He tossed a thick folder onto the table in front of Jalen and sat down across from him, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. All right, kid, Thompson said, his voice flat and tired. Let's go through this again. Jalen's shoulders sagged. He had told his story so many times already, but no one seemed to believe him. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, his voice hoarse. I already told you everything, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I found the bike. I didn't know it was stolen. Thompson sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. Look, I get it. You're scared. You think you're in a lot of trouble, and you don't know what to do. But lying isn't going to help you. We know you didn't just find that bike. So stop wasting my time and tell me the truth. I am telling the truth. Jalen's voice cracked, tears filling his eyes again. I didn't steal anything. I just saw it in the park and rode it for a bit. I was gonna put it back, I swear. Thompson shook his head slowly, a smirk forming on his lips. You know, you're not doing yourself any favors, kid. We've got witnesses who saw you riding that bike all over town. You really expect me to believe you were just borrowing it? Jalen bit his lip, his heart pounding in his chest. But I wasn't. I didn't know. I thought it was just, I didn't know it belonged to someone. Thompson leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What kind of fool do you take me for? You're not some innocent little kid who just stumbled across a bike and thought it was free for the taking. You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you're caught. Jalen shook his head, his vision blurring with tears. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I was just... Save it, Thompson snapped, cutting him off. You're just digging yourself into a deeper hole. We've got you dead to rights, kid. Stolen property, resisting arrest. Resisting arrest? Jalen's voice rose in panic. I didn't resist anything. Thompson slammed his hand on the table, making Jalen flinch. Enough. You think this is some kind of game? That you can just sit here and lie your way out of this? He leaned in close, his voice low and menacing. This isn't going to end the way you think it will. You're not going home until you tell me the truth. Jalen's breath hitched, his mind racing. He felt trapped, like he was drowning, and no one was going to save him. I am telling the truth, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm not lying. Thompson sat back, his expression hard. Fine. You want to play it that way? You can stay in here until you're ready to start being honest. Maybe a few more hours will help you remember the details a bit better. Jalen's eyes widened in disbelief. No, please, he cried, his voice desperate. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. I just want to go home. Please, I didn't do anything. But Thompson ignored him. He stood up, grabbing the folder from the table and turning toward the door. I'll be back when you're ready to talk, he said coldly, his hand on the doorknob. Wait, Jalen's voice broke, the tears spilling over. Please don't leave me here. I didn't steal it. I swear. I just wanted to ride it for a little while. Thompson paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. He glanced back at Jalen, his face hard and unreadable. You've got one last chance, kid. Tell me the truth. Who were you working with? Was it a gang? Were you stealing for someone else? Jalen's heart sank. No, he cried, shaking his head frantically. There's no one else. I wasn't stealing for anyone. I'm not in a gang, I promise. Thompson's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Fine. Have it your way. He yanked the door open and walked out, slamming it shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Jalen buried his face in his hands, his whole body trembling. He didn't know what else to say, what else to do. No matter how many times he told the truth, no one seemed to believe him. He was alone, trapped in this cold, gray room with no way out. He didn't know how much time had passed, but it felt like forever. His stomach growled painfully, and his throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. He wanted his mom, wanted her to come in and take him home, to make everything okay, but she wasn't here. No one was. The door opened again, and Jalen looked up, his heart leaping in hope. But it wasn't his mom. It was Officer Thompson again, his expression as hard as ever. "All right, kid," he said, walking over to the table. "Time's up. We're taking this to the next level. You're going to be charged with theft and whatever else we can throw at you unless you start cooperating." Jalen's mouth went dry. "But I didn't steal anything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm not lying. I swear." Thompson's eyes flashed with anger. "You've had your chance. Now you're going to face the consequences." Before Jalen could say anything else, the door opened again, and another officer stepped in. Jalen's heart jumped as he saw the serious look on the man's face. "Brian, we need to talk," the officer said, glancing at Jalen. Outside, Thompson frowned but nodded. He turned to Jalen, his voice cold. "Stay put. We're not done here." The two officers stepped out, leaving Jalen alone once again. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. He didn't know how much more of this he could take. He just wanted to go home, to be safe, to be anywhere but here. Minutes passed, each one feeling longer than the last. The door finally swung open, and this time, Jalen heard a familiar voice. "Jalen!" It was his mother, Tanya, her voice sharp and filled with panic. She rushed into the room, her face flushed with anger and worry. Jalen looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Mom!" he cried, his voice breaking. He tried to stand, but his legs were too weak. Before Tanya could reach him, another figure stepped into the room behind her. Jared Wallace, a tall man in a crisp suit, entered with an air of calm authority. Jared was a family friend and a lawyer, someone Tanya trusted implicitly. He took one look at Jalen, his expression softening before he turned a hard gaze on Officer Thompson, who had followed them in. "Step away from the boy, Officer Thompson," Jared said, his voice firm but controlled. "He's been through enough." Thompson frowned. "Who are you?" "I'm Jared Wallace, legal counsel for Jalen Harris and his mother. You should be aware that this interrogation, conducted without a guardian present and without any real evidence, is highly questionable," Jared said coolly, his eyes never leaving Thompson's face. Tanya moved to Jalen's side, wrapping her arms around him protectively. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" she snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "He's just a kid. How could you do this to him?" "Ma'am, please calm down," Thompson began, but Tanya wasn't having it. "Calm down?" she nearly shouted, her eyes blazing. "You've kept my son in here for hours without food, without water, scaring him half to death. You think I'm going to calm down?" Jared placed a hand on Tanya's shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "Tanya, let me handle this." Tanya's breathing was ragged, but she nodded, her eyes never leaving Thompson. Jared turned back to the officer. "Officer Thompson," Jared said, his voice steady, "we need to see any and all evidence you have against Jalen Harris right now. And let me remind you that anything obtained during this unlawful interrogation can and will be used against you and this department in court." Thompson's jaw tightened. "We have witnesses who saw him riding the stolen bike," he said defensively. "Witnesses who saw a child riding a bike he found abandoned in a public park," Jared corrected. "That's hardly enough to justify the way you've treated him. You've violated his rights and you're dangerously close to facing a lawsuit." Thompson glared at Jared, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. He glanced at Jalen, who was still clinging to his mother, then back at Jared. "We were just trying to get to the truth. The truth is," Jared said evenly, "that you've traumatized an innocent child based on an assumption. Now, unless you want this to become a much bigger problem for you and your department, I suggest you release Jalen immediately." Thompson hesitated, his eyes flicking between Jared and Tanya, whose expression was still furious. He seemed to be weighing his options. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight. "You can take him home. But we're not done with this investigation." "Oh, we're not done, all right," Tanya snapped, her voice cold. "You're going to pay for what you did to my son." Thompson ignored her, turning to Jared. "Just get them out of here." Jared nodded, then gently guided Tanya and Jalen toward the door. "We'll be filing a formal complaint first thing tomorrow," he said over his shoulder, his voice calm but firm. As they walked out of the station, Tanya kept a protective arm around Jalen, who was still trembling, his face buried in her side. Jared followed close behind, his expression serious. "Mom, I'm sorry," Jalen whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't do anything wrong, I swear." Tanya stopped and knelt down in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. "I know, baby. I know you didn't. You have nothing to be sorry for, okay? This isn't your fault. Jalen nodded, tears spilling over again. I was so scared. Tanya pulled him into a tight hug, her voice breaking. I know, sweetheart, but you're safe now. We're going home. Jared watched them, his expression softening. Let's get you both home. We'll talk more about what to do next tomorrow. They made their way out of the station, the cold night air hitting them as they stepped outside. Jalen felt like he could finally breathe again, the tightness in his chest easing a little with each step they took away from that awful place. As they walked to the car, Jalen looked up at his mom. I love you, Mom, he whispered, his voice shaking. Tanya squeezed his hand gently. I love you too, baby. And I promise, we're going to make sure they pay for what they did to you. Jared opened the car door for them, his voice calm and reassuring. We'll get justice, Jalen. I promise. Jalen nodded, the tears still streaming down his face. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but as long as his mom and Jared were with him, he felt like he could get through anything. The next morning, Jalen sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a bowl of cereal. The colorful shapes floated in milk that had gone warm and unappetizing, but he couldn't bring himself to take a bite. His mind was still replaying the events from the night before. The harsh lights, Officer Thompson's angry voice, the cold, empty room. It all felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Tanya bustled around the kitchen, her movements tense and sharp. She slammed a mug onto the counter, the sound startling Jalen from his thoughts. She glanced over at him, her face softening. Sorry, baby, she said quietly. I didn't mean to scare you, Jalen shrugged, staring down at his cereal again. It's okay. Tanya sat down across from him, reaching out to gently touch his hand. You don't have to go to school today if you don't want to, she said softly. We can stay home, watch a movie, whatever you want. Jalen shook his head slowly. I don't want to stay home. I just want things to be normal again. Tanya's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. I know, sweetheart, and we're going to make it right. I promise. Before Jalen could respond, there was a knock at the door. Tanya glanced at the clock, then back at Jalen. That must be Jared, she said, squeezing his hand before standing up. Jalen's heart sank. He knew Jared was coming over to talk about what happened, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to relive it all again. He watched as his mother opened the door and let Jared in. Morning, Jared said, his voice calm and reassuring. He nodded at Jalen, giving him a small smile. How are you holding up, Jalen? Jalen shrugged, his eyes darting to the table. Okay, I guess. Jared's smile faded slightly, and he turned to Tanya. Can we sit down and talk? Tanya nodded and gestured to the living room. They moved to the couch, Jalen sitting between his mom and Jared, feeling small and out of place. Jared pulled out a notepad and a pen, setting them on the coffee table in front of him. Jalen, Jared began gently, I know this is really hard, but I need you to tell me everything that happened last night, from the beginning. Jalen glanced at his mom, her eyes full of encouragement, then back at Jared. He took a deep breath, his hands twisting in his lap. I was just riding my bike, he started, his voice barely above a whisper. My old one, you know? And then I saw this new bike in the park. It looked really nice, and I thought maybe someone left it there by mistake. He paused, his throat tightening. I know I shouldn't have taken it, but I just wanted to try it out, just for a little while. I was going to bring it back, I swear. Jared nodded, his pen poised over the notepad. And then what happened? Jalen bit his lip, his eyes blurring with tears. This lady saw me and started yelling. She said I stole the bike, but I didn't. I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. She called the police, and they came, and they arrested me. Tanya put her arm around Jalen's shoulders, holding him close. It's okay, baby. You're doing great. Just keep going. Jalen nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. They took me to the station, and Officer Thompson, he kept yelling at me. He wouldn't listen to me. He just kept saying I was lying, that I was part of a gang or something. Jared's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Did they offer you anything to eat or drink? Did they let you call your mom? Jalen shook his head. No, they just kept asking me questions. I was so scared, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to tell them the truth, but they wouldn't believe me. Tanya's grip on Jalen tightened, her face pale with anger. They had no right to treat you like that. You're just a child. Jared nodded, scribbling a few notes. Okay, Jalen. You're doing really well. Now I know this is hard, but I need you to remember everything Officer Thompson said to you, even the things that might seem small or unimportant. Jalen hesitated, his mind racing. He tried to remember every word, every expression on Officer Thompson's face. It all felt like a blur, but a few things stood out. He called me a liar, Jalen said slowly, his voice trembling. He said I was trying to fool him, that I was just like all the other kids who break the law. And he said I was going to go to jail if I didn't tell him who I was working with. Jared's eyes darkened. Did he make any threats? Did he say anything about hurting you? Jalen shook his head, his heart pounding. No, but he was really angry. It felt like he hated me. Tanya's face twisted with fury. How could anyone hate my baby? She muttered, her voice breaking. He's just a child. Jared reached out and gently touched her arm. Tanya, I know this is hard, but we're going to make them pay for what they did. I promise you that. Tanya nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. What do we do now? Jared took a deep breath. First, we file a formal complaint with the police department. Then, we go to the media. This is a clear case of racial profiling and police misconduct. We need to put pressure on them to take this seriously. Jalen's stomach tightened. The media? He asked, his voice shaky. You mean like on TV? Jared nodded gently. Yes, Jalen. I know it's scary, but the more people who know what happened to you, the harder it will be for the police to just sweep this under the rug. Jalen glanced at his mom, who nodded reassuringly. It's okay, baby. We'll be with you the whole time. Jalen took a deep breath, his mind spinning. He didn't like the idea of everyone knowing what happened, but if it meant stopping Officer Thompson from doing this to someone else, okay, he whispered. I'll do it. Jared smiled softly. You're very brave, Jalen. We're going to get justice for you. They spent the next hour going over every detail again, Jared writing everything down and explaining what would happen next. When they finally finished, Jalen felt drained, like he had run a marathon without stopping. Thank you, Jalen, Jared said, standing up and gathering his things. You did great. I'm going to start filing the paperwork today. We'll get the ball rolling. Tanya stood up, her expression fierce and determined. We're going to make sure they never do this to another kid again. Jared nodded, his face serious. We will. I'll be in touch soon. After he left, Tanya turned to Jalen, her eyes filled with pride and love. I'm so proud of you, baby, she said softly. You were so brave. Jalen nodded, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy blanket. I just want this to be over, he whispered. Tanya pulled him into a tight hug. I know, sweetheart, and it will be. We're going to make sure of it. As they sat together on the couch, Jalen felt a small flicker of hope. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but with his mom and Jared by his side, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make things right. Jalen stood nervously in the living room, his hands twisting the hem of his shirt. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. Tanya and Jared were talking quietly in the corner, their voices low but intense. Jalen couldn't hear what they were saying, but he knew it was about him, about what had happened. The doorbell rang and Jalen jumped, his heart pounding. He knew who it was, the reporter from the local news station. They had agreed to do the interview at home, where Jalen would feel more comfortable, but he still felt like 1,000 butterflies were fluttering in his stomach. Tanya turned to him, her face softening as she saw his expression. You okay, baby? She asked gently. Jalen nodded, even though he wasn't sure if that was true. Yeah, I don't want to mess up. You won't mess up, Tanya assured him, crossing the room to kneel in front of him. She placed her hands on his shoulders, looking him in the eye. Just tell the truth, okay? That's all you have to do. Jared and I will be right here with you. Jalen took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. Tanya stood up and opened the door. A woman with short blonde hair and a professional smile stepped inside, followed by a cameraman with a bulky camera slung over his shoulder. Hello, Mrs. Harris, the reporter said, her smile widening. I'm Lisa Monroe from Channel 8 News. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us. Of course, Tanya said, her voice calm and steady. This is my son, Jalen. Lisa's eyes softened as she looked at Jalen. Hi, Jalen. It's nice to meet you. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Jalen nodded, his throat tight. Thank you. Lisa turned to Jared, shaking his hand. And you must be Mr. Wallace. I've heard a lot about your work. Thank you, Ms. Monroe, Jared said, his voice polite but firm. We're hoping this interview will bring attention to what happened and ensure that the police are held accountable. Absolutely, Lisa said, her expression serious. We're here to make sure your story is heard. They set up the camera in the living room, the bright lights making Jalen squint. He sat on the couch with his mom on one side and Jared on the other, feeling like a deer caught in headlights. Lisa sat across from them, her expression sympathetic but focused. Are you ready, Jalen? She asked softly. Jalen took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, the cameraman gave a thumbs up, and Lisa turned to the camera, her professional demeanor slipping into place. Good evening. I'm Lisa Monroe with Channel 8 News, and today we're speaking with the Harris family, who claim their son was wrongfully detained and mistreated by local police officers. Jalen, thank you for being here today. Jalen glanced at his mom, who nodded encouragingly. Thank you for having me, he said quietly. Can you tell us what happened that day? Lisa asked gently, her eyes kind but intent. Jalen took another deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. I was riding my bike, my old bike, in the park, and then I saw this new bike. It was just there. I thought maybe someone left it behind or something. I just wanted to ride it for a little bit. I wasn't trying to steal it. Lisa nodded, her expression serious. And then what happened? Jalen's hands twisted in his lap. This lady saw me. She started yelling and saying I stole the bike, but I didn't. She called the police, and when they came, they arrested me. Arrested you, Lisa repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. How did they treat you? Jalen felt his mom's hand tighten on his shoulder, giving him strength. They put me in handcuffs and took me to the police station. I was so scared. They kept asking me questions, saying I was lying. They didn't give me anything to eat or drink, and they wouldn't let me call my mom. Tanya's face was tight with anger, but she stayed silent, letting Jalen speak. Did they tell you why they were questioning you? Lisa asked, her tone gentle. Jalen shook his head. They just kept saying I was lying, that I stole the bike. But I didn't. I was just riding it. I was going to bring it back. Lisa turned to Tanya. Mrs. Harris, how did you find out that Jalen had been arrested? Tanya's jaw tightened. I got a call from a friend who saw Jalen being put into the police car. I rushed to the station, but they wouldn't let me see him at first. I had to argue with them, and they kept saying he was being interrogated for theft. My 12-year-old son, can you imagine? Lisa's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced at Jared. Mr. Wallace, as the family's legal representative, what steps are you taking to address this situation? Jared leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and authoritative. We're filing a formal complaint against Officer Thompson and the police department for wrongful detention, illegal interrogation of a minor without a guardian present, and emotional distress. We're also exploring a civil lawsuit for damages. Lisa nodded, her expression serious. What do you hope to achieve with this legal action? We want justice for Jalen, Jared said firmly. But we also want to raise awareness of how often situations like this happen to young black children. Racial profiling and police misconduct are serious issues that need to be addressed, not just in this town, but across the country. Thank you, Mr. Wallace, Lisa said, turning back to Jalen. Jalen, is there anything you'd like people to know? Anything you want to say to the viewers watching at home? Jalen hesitated, his heart pounding. He felt a lump forming in his throat, but he swallowed hard and looked straight into the camera. I just want people to know that not everyone who looks like me is a bad person, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't do anything wrong, but they still treated me like I was a criminal, and that's not fair. Tanya squeezed his shoulder, her eyes filled with tears. That's right, baby. It's not fair. Lisa's eyes were soft as she turned back to the camera. Thank you, Jalen. And thank you, Mrs. Harris, Mr. Wallace, for sharing your story. We'll continue to follow this case closely. The cameraman signaled that the recording was over, and Jalen let out a long breath, feeling like he'd just run a marathon. Lisa stood up and reached out to shake his hand. You were very brave, Jalen, she said warmly. Thank you for sharing your story. Jalen nodded, his hands shaking slightly. Thank you for listening. As Lisa and the cameraman packed up their equipment, Jared turned to Tanya, his expression serious. That was a good first step. The public is going to be outraged when they see this. Tanya nodded, her eyes still on Jalen. I just want them to understand what he went through. He's just a kid. They will, Jared assured her. We're going to make sure of that. After the news crew left, Jalen sat on the couch, feeling drained but lighter, like a weight had been lifted off his chest. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but for the first time in days, he felt like maybe things would be okay. Proud of you, Jalen, Jared said, patting him on the back. You did great. Tanya smiled, pulling Jalen into a hug. You were amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you. Jalen nodded, the knot in his stomach loosening. Thanks, Mom. I hope this helps. It will, Tanya said firmly. It's going to help a lot of people. As they sat together, Jalen felt a spark of hope. Maybe telling his story would make a difference. Maybe things would start to change. And maybe, just maybe, they could finally move forward. Jalen sat at the kitchen table, his head resting on his folded arms, staring blankly at the cold, untouched bowl of cereal in front of him. Everything felt surreal, like he was stuck in a bad dream that wouldn't end. He hadn't slept much the past few nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the harsh lights of the interrogation room and heard Officer Thompson's angry voice accusing him of things he didn't do. Tanya moved around the kitchen, her movements sharp and quick. She was talking to Jared, who sat across from Jalen with his legal pad open, scribbling notes. They were discussing the next steps in the lawsuit they were planning to file against the police department. Jalen had never seen his mom like this before. So focused, so determined. It was like she was a different person. Okay, so we have the formal complaint ready, Jared was saying, his voice calm and steady. We need to file it at the courthouse today. Then we can schedule a meeting with Captain Miller. We want to make it clear that we're not just going to accept a settlement to keep this quiet. Good, Tanya said sharply, her eyes flashing with anger. They need to understand that what they did to Jalen is unacceptable. I want them to know they can't just treat kids like criminals because of the color of their skin. Jalen shifted in his chair, the words swirling around him, making him feel small and out of place. He knew his mom and Jared were doing all of this for him, but he still felt like he didn't belong in this conversation. Tanya glanced over at him, her expression softening. You okay, baby? You want something else to eat? Jalen shook his head. No, I'm not hungry. Tanya reached over and brushed his hair back gently. I know this is hard, but you're doing great, Jalen. We're going to get through this. I promise. Jalen nodded, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what to say. He felt like everything was out of his control, like he was just along for the ride in a car that was going way too fast. We're meeting with Captain Miller tomorrow afternoon, Jared said, his eyes on his notes. We need to be clear about what we want. Disciplinary action against Officer Thompson, changes to how they handle situations with minors, and of course, a formal apology. Tanya's jaw tightened. An apology is the least they can do. They traumatized my son. They need to take responsibility. Jared nodded. We'll make sure they do, but we need to be prepared for them to push back. They're going to try to offer money to make this go away. Jalen looked up, confusion clouding his face. Money? Why would they give us money? Tanya sighed, rubbing her temples. It's not really about the money, baby. They just want us to drop the lawsuit, to keep quiet about what happened. But we're not going to do that. We want real change. Jalen nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand everything they were talking about, but he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want anyone else to go through what he had. He didn't want another kid to feel the way he had felt in that room. Scared, alone, and powerless. I just want them to know it's not okay, he said quietly. They shouldn't treat people like that. Jared gave him a reassuring smile. We're going to make sure they hear that loud and clear, Jalen. The next day, they arrived at the police station just before noon. Jalen felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach as they approached the building. The last time he had been here, it had been terrifying. He had never thought he would be back so soon. Tanya noticed his hesitation and squeezed his hand gently. You don't have to go inside if you don't want to, baby. You can wait in the car. Jalen shook his head, swallowing hard. No, I want to go. I want to be there. Tanya smiled, pride shining in her eyes. You're so brave. Jared held the door open for them as they walked into the station. The lobby was busy, with officers and civilians moving in and out. Jalen felt every eye on him, and his heart raced as they approached the front desk. We're here to see Captain Miller, Jared said to the officer behind the desk. We have an appointment. The officer nodded, his gaze lingering on Jalen for a moment before he picked up the phone. One moment, after a brief conversation, he looked back at them. Captain Miller will see you now. Follow me. They walked down a long, narrow hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Jalen's palms were sweaty, and he wiped them on his pants, trying to calm himself down. He glanced at his mom, who gave him a reassuring nod. They entered a small conference room, where Captain Miller was waiting for them. He was a tall, imposing man with graying hair and a stern expression. He stood as they entered, extending his hand to Tanya first. Mrs. Harris, Mr. Wallace, thank you for coming in. And you must be Jalen, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he looked at Jalen. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Jalen nodded, but didn't say anything. He didn't know how to respond to the man who was in charge of the officers who had put him through such a horrible experience. Please, have a seat, Captain Miller said, gesturing to the chairs around the table. I want to hear your concerns. They sat down, and Jared opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder. Thank you for meeting with us, Captain. We're here because we believe the treatment of Jalen Harris by Officer Thompson was not only unjust, but also a violation of his rights. We're seeking disciplinary action against Officer Thompson, policy changes in how the department handles minors, and a formal apology. Captain Miller nodded slowly, folding his hands on the table. I understand your frustration, and I assure you we are taking this matter seriously. An internal review is underway, and Officer Thompson has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that review. That's not enough, Tanya said sharply, her voice trembling with anger. My son was treated like a criminal for no reason. He was terrified, hungry, and alone for hours. You think putting that officer on leave is enough? Captain Miller's expression remained calm. I understand your concerns, Mrs. Harris, but we need to follow proper procedures. If the review finds that Officer Thompson acted inappropriately, there will be consequences. Jared leaned forward, his voice firm. We're not just looking for consequences for Officer Thompson. We want systemic changes. We want your department to adopt clear guidelines for how to handle situations involving minors, especially when there's no immediate danger or evidence of a crime. Captain Miller hesitated, then nodded. We're willing to consider policy changes, I'll need to discuss it with the rest of the department, but I believe we can work together on this. And what about the apology? Tanya demanded, her eyes locked on the captain. Jalen deserves an apology from this department for what he went through. Captain Miller looked at Jalen, his expression softening. Jalen, I'm very sorry for what happened to you. No child should have to go through that. If you felt scared or mistreated, that's not the way we want to do things here. Jalen felt a lump form in his throat, but he nodded. Thank you, he whispered. Jared glanced at Tanya, then back at Captain Miller. We're willing to discuss a settlement, but only if it includes these policy changes and a public apology from the department. Captain Miller nodded. I'll take this to the higher-ups and see what we can do. I can't make any promises, but I will do my best to make sure your concerns are addressed. They stood to leave, and Captain Miller extended his hand again. Tanya hesitated but shook it, her expression still hard. Thank you for meeting with us, Captain, Jared said, his voice measured. We'll be waiting to hear from you. As they walked out of the station, Jalen felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't over, but they were finally being heard. He glanced up at his mom, who smiled down at him. You did great in there, baby, she said softly. Jalen nodded, feeling the tightness in his chest loosen a little. I just want it to be over. It will be, Tanya promised, her voice filled with determination. We're going to make sure of it. They left the station, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. Jalen took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. For the first time in days, he felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe things would get better. Maybe they could really change things. And maybe, just maybe, they could finally start to move forward. The sun was just starting to set as Jalen, Tanya, and Jared gathered around the kitchen table. A stack of documents lay spread out between them, filled with legal jargon that Jalen could barely understand. His mom and Jared were deep in conversation, discussing the details of the lawsuit they were about to file against the police department. Okay, so we're going to file the civil lawsuit tomorrow morning, Jared said, tapping his pen against the table. We're asking for damages for emotional distress, unlawful detention, and violation of Jalen's rights as a minor. But remember, it's not just about the money. This is about holding them accountable. Tanya nodded, her eyes sharp and focused. I don't care about the money. I just want them to take responsibility for what they did to my son. Jalen sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He still wasn't sure how he felt about everything that was happening. It was strange to hear people talk about his life in such formal terms, using words like damages and accountability. He just wanted things to go back to normal, but he knew that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Jared glanced at Jalen, his expression softening. How are you holding up, Jalen? I know this is a lot to take in. Jalen shrugged, staring at the papers on the table. I'm okay, I guess. I just don't understand why they did it. Why didn't they believe me? Tanya reached over and squeezed his hand. It's not your fault, baby. Sometimes people have ugly ideas about others, and they don't see the truth even when it's right in front of them. That's why we're doing this, to make sure they can't treat anyone else like that. Jalen nodded slowly. He knew his mom was right, but it didn't make it hurt any less. He still felt that knot of fear and confusion in his chest, the same one he'd felt in that interrogation room. Jared cleared his throat, bringing their attention back to the papers in front of them. We're also requesting that the department adopt new policies for handling cases involving minors. This isn't just about Jalen, it's about making sure other kids aren't put through the same trauma. Tanya's eyes flashed with determination. They need to know that they can't just push people around because they think they can get away with it. I want them to remember Jalen's name. I want them to know we fought back. Jared smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. They will, Tanya. We're going to make sure of that. He handed her a pen, and she signed the last of the documents with a flourish, her jaw set in a hard line. What's next? She asked, her voice steady. Tomorrow we file the lawsuit and hold a press conference to announce it. It's important that we keep the public on our side, Jared explained. We need people to understand that this isn't just a case. It's about changing the system. Jalen's stomach tightened at the thought of more public attention. Do I have to be there? He asked quietly, looking up at Jared. Jared shook his head gently. No, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, Jalen. Your mom and I will handle the press conference. You've already been incredibly brave. Jalen felt a wave of relief wash over him. He wasn't sure he could face all those cameras again. Not after everything that had happened. He just wanted to go to school, play with his friends, and forget that any of this had ever happened. But he knew that wasn't possible. Not yet, anyway. I want to be there, Jalen said suddenly, surprising himself as much as anyone else. I don't want them to think I'm scared of them. Tanya looked at him, her eyes full of love and pride. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, baby. You've already been so strong. Jalen shook his head. I want to be there. I want them to see that they didn't beat me. Jared nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. All right, Jalen, we'll have you there, but you don't have to speak if you don't want to. Just your presence will make a huge impact. The next morning, the three of them stood outside the courthouse. A small crowd of reporters gathered around. The sun was bright, the sky clear and blue, but Jalen's stomach was a knot of nerves. He clutched his mom's hand tightly, trying to ignore the cameras and the murmur of voices around them. Jared stepped up to the podium that had been set up for the press conference, clearing his throat as the reporters quieted down. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today, we are filing a civil lawsuit against the local police department for their unlawful detention and mistreatment of Jalen Harris, a 12-year-old boy who was wrongfully accused and traumatized by the actions of Officer Brian Thompson. This lawsuit is about more than just seeking damages. It's about ensuring that no other child is subjected to this kind of abuse and neglect. He paused, glancing back at Jalen and Tanya, his expression serious. We are also demanding policy changes within the department, including new protocols for handling cases involving minors and mandatory training for officers on how to properly engage with young people in a way that respects their rights and dignity. The reporters began shouting questions, but Jared held up his hand. We will not be taking questions today. Our focus is on moving forward with this case and ensuring justice for Jalen and his family. Thank you. He stepped away from the podium, and Jalen felt a surge of pride as the reporters' cameras flashed. He might not have spoken, but he was here, standing beside his mom and Jared, showing the world that he wasn't afraid. After the press conference, they went back to Jared's office to discuss the next steps. The room was filled with the smell of coffee and the quiet hum of a fan. Jalen sat on the couch, his legs swinging back and forth as Jared and his mom talked about the lawsuit. This is going to take time, Jared was saying. The department is going to fight back hard, especially if we're pushing for policy changes. But we have a strong case. We have evidence, witnesses, and public support. Tanya nodded, her expression resolute. I don't care how long it takes. I'm not backing down. Jared smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. They spent the rest of the afternoon going over the legal strategy. Jalen listened, trying to follow along, but it all felt overwhelming. He wished he could just forget about it all, but he knew that wasn't an option. When they finally left Jared's office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Jalen felt exhausted, but there was a strange sense of calm settling over him. They were fighting back. They were doing something to make sure this never happened again. As they drove home, Tanya reached over and took his hand, her eyes soft with love. I'm so proud of you, Jalen. You're the bravest person I know. Jalen smiled, squeezing her hand. I'm just glad you're here, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. Tanya's voice was thick with emotion as she replied, You don't have to worry about that, baby. I'm always going to be here for you. They pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their home bringing a wave of comfort to Jalen. He knew they still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like they were moving forward. Inside, Tanya made dinner, and they ate together at the kitchen table, talking about anything but the lawsuit. Jalen felt the tension slowly easing from his body as they laughed and joked, the stress of the day melting away. That night, as he lay in bed, Jalen thought about everything that had happened. He still felt scared and uncertain about the future, but he also felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They were fighting back. They were making a difference. And maybe, just maybe, things would get better. With that thought in his mind, Jalen closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, the weight on his chest a little lighter than before. The atmosphere in Jared's office was tense as they gathered around the conference table. Papers were strewn across the polished wood surface, filled with legal jargon and highlighted notes. Jalen sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and determination. Tanya and Jared were deep in conversation, their voices low but urgent. They've offered a settlement, Jared said, tapping a document with his pen. It's substantial, but there's no admission of wrongdoing. They want us to drop the case and agree to a confidentiality clause. Tanya's eyes narrowed. No way. I'm not going to let them get away with this. We need them to change their policies and take responsibility for what they did to Jalen. Jalen glanced up at his mom, seeing the fierce determination in her eyes. It was both comforting and unsettling. He knew she was doing this for him, but he couldn't help feeling like it was all spiraling out of control. Jared nodded. I agree. This isn't just about money, but we need to be strategic. If we push too hard, they might withdraw the offer and drag this out in court for years. Tanya shook her head. I don't care how long it takes. I want them to know they can't treat people like this and get away with it. Jalen's stomach tightened. What if they never admit they were wrong? He asked quietly, his voice breaking the tension in the room. Tanya turned to him, her eyes softening. Baby, this isn't just about them admitting they were wrong. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Jalen nodded slowly, trying to absorb her words. It was still hard to believe that everything that had happened to him was now the center of such a huge legal battle. He just wanted things to go back to normal, but he knew that wasn't possible, not until this was over. "What's the next step, Jared?" Tanya asked, her voice steady. Jared took a deep breath, his expression serious. "We push for more. We tell them that we won't settle without a commitment to real changes, policy reforms, training for officers, and a public apology. We need to show them that we're not just after money, we're after justice." Tanya nodded, her jaw set. "Good. Let's do it." Jalen listened as they went over the details of their strategy, his mind drifting in and out of the conversation. He felt like a bystander in his own life, watching as his mom and Jared fought to make things right. Part of him wished he could just disappear, escape all the attention and stress, but he knew he had to be strong, for his mom, for himself. The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls. Jared and Tanya went back and forth with the police department's lawyers, negotiating terms and demanding changes. Jalen stayed mostly in the background, trying to focus on school and his friends, but it was hard to concentrate when he knew that everything he did and said could impact the case. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Tanya's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then looked up at Jared, who was sitting across from her, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "They agreed to a meeting," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. "Tomorrow afternoon. They want to discuss the terms of the settlement." Jared nodded. "This is a good sign. It means they're taking our demands seriously." Jalen swallowed hard. "Does that mean they're going to change the rules?" "We'll find out tomorrow," Jared said, his voice calm but firm. "But we're not going to back down. They know that." The next day, they arrived at the police station just before 2 o'clock. Jalen's heart raced as they walked through the familiar entrance, his mind flashing back to the last time he had been there. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't alone. His mom and Jared were with him, standing tall and strong. Captain Miller met them in a large conference room, flanked by a few other officials and the department's lawyer. The air was thick with tension as everyone took their seats. "Thank you for coming," Captain Miller said, his voice measured. "We've reviewed your demands, and we're prepared to discuss a resolution." Jared nodded, his expression serious. "We're glad to hear that, Captain. We're looking for more than just a financial settlement. We want assurances that what happened to Jalen will never happen to another child." The lawyer, a tall man with a sharp gaze, leaned forward. "We understand your concerns, and we're willing to make some changes. We're proposing new training programs for our officers, specifically on handling cases involving minors. We're also willing to include a public apology from the department." Tanya's eyes flashed with anger. "That's a start, but it's not enough. We want real policy changes, new guidelines for when and how minors can be detained and questioned, and we want Officer Thompson fired." There was a murmur among the officials, and Captain Miller's jaw tightened. "We're still conducting an internal review of Officer Thompson's actions. Until that's complete, we can't make any decisions about his employment status." Jared's voice was calm but firm. "With all due respect, Captain, the community deserves to know that officers who abuse their power will be held accountable. This isn't just about one case. This is about the integrity of your department." The room fell silent as everyone processed Jared's words. Jalen watched as the officials exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from concern to defiance. Finally, Captain Miller nodded slowly. "We're willing to consider your demands for policy changes. We'll need to work out the details, but I can assure you that we take this very seriously." "And what about the apology?" Tanya pressed, her voice steady but fierce. The department's lawyer nodded. "We're prepared to issue a public statement acknowledging that mistakes were made and apologizing to Jalen and his family for the distress this has caused." Jalen felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety wash over him. This was what they had been fighting for, but it still felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. "What about Officer Thompson?" Jared asked, his eyes locked on Captain Miller. The captain hesitated, then sighed. "The internal review will be completed within the next 2 weeks. Based on the findings, we'll take appropriate action. I can't promise anything more than that right now." Tanya's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "We'll be watching." They spent the next hour going over the details, discussing the terms of the settlement and the proposed policy changes. Jalen listened quietly, feeling a sense of resolve building inside him. This was about more than just what had happened to him. It was about making sure that no other kid had to go through the same thing. As they left the station, Jared turned to Tanya and Jalen, his expression serious but hopeful. "We've made real progress today. They know they're on notice. Now it's up to us to keep the pressure on and make sure they follow through." Tanya nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We're not going to let them get away with anything less than what's right." Jalen glanced up at them, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. They were fighting for him, and for everyone who had ever been mistreated or ignored, and he was proud to be a part of that fight. As they walked out into the bright afternoon sun, Jalen felt a sense of hope and purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't over yet, but they were closer to justice than they had ever been, and that was something worth fighting for. 2 weeks after the initial meeting with Captain Miller, Jalen, Tanya, and Jared gathered once more around the kitchen table. The past days had been filled with negotiations, discussions, and tense waiting. Today was the day they would learn the final terms of the settlement, as well as the outcome of the department's internal review of Officer Thompson. Tanya's fingers tapped anxiously against the tabletop, her eyes never leaving Jared's laptop screen. Jalen sat beside her, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to expect, but he hoped that this would finally bring some closure. Jared glanced at the clock. They should be calling any minute now. Almost on cue, the laptop chimed, and the screen filled with the faces of Captain Miller, the department's lawyer, and a few other officials. The atmosphere was tense but formal as everyone exchanged brief greetings. "Good afternoon," Captain Miller began, his tone measured. "Thank you all for joining us. After extensive discussions, we have reached a proposed resolution regarding the case of Jalen Harris." Tanya leaned forward, her voice firm. "We're listening." The lawyer cleared his throat. "We are prepared to offer a settlement that includes financial compensation for emotional distress and legal fees, as well as a formal public apology from the department to Jalen and his family. Additionally, the department will implement new training programs for all officers on how to properly interact with minors, particularly in cases where there is no immediate threat or danger." Jalen's heart skipped a beat. This was everything they had been fighting for. He glanced at his mom, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Captain Miller continued, "Furthermore, we have completed the internal review of Officer Thompson's conduct. It has been determined that his actions were in violation of department policy and did not meet our standards of professionalism. As a result, Officer Thompson has been terminated from his position." A wave of relief washed over Jalen. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Officer Thompson wouldn't be able to do this to anyone else. He looked at his mom, whose eyes were shining with tears of both relief and triumph. "Thank you," Tanya said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "This means a lot to us." Jared leaned forward, his tone measured and professional. "We appreciate the steps you're taking, Captain. We're satisfied with the proposed settlement and the changes you've committed to, but we also want to ensure that these changes are implemented and upheld long-term." The department's lawyer nodded. "We understand your concerns. We are prepared to establish an independent review committee to oversee the implementation of these new policies and report back regularly on their effectiveness." Tanya's face softened as she looked at Jared. "This sounds like what we've been fighting for." Jared nodded. "It's a good resolution. It ensures that what happened to Jalen won't be forgotten, and it holds the department accountable for real change." Jalen listened to the conversation, his heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. This wasn't just about the settlement or even the apology. It was about knowing that things would be different going forward, that no other kid would have to go through what he had. "We accept the terms of the settlement," Jared said finally, his voice steady. "We look forward to working together to implement these changes and make a positive impact on our community." Captain Miller nodded, his expression sincere. "Thank you. We are committed to ensuring that this department earns back the trust of our community." After the call ended, the room was filled with a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. Tanya turned to Jalen, her eyes brimming with tears. "You did it, baby," she whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "We did it." Jalen hugged her back, feeling the warmth and love radiating from her. "I just didn't want anyone else to get hurt." Jared smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "You were incredibly brave, Jalen. This is a big victory, not just for you, but for everyone in this community." The next morning, the police department held a press conference. Captain Miller stood before a row of microphones, his voice steady and clear as he addressed the public. "Today we are announcing a series of changes to our policies and procedures regarding interactions with minors. These changes are a direct result of the case involving Jalen Harris, and we are committed to ensuring that all members of our community are treated with respect and dignity. We apologize to Jalen and his family for the distress this incident has caused, and we are dedicated to rebuilding trust and accountability within our department." Watching the broadcast from their living room, Jalen felt a swell of pride. This was what they had fought for. It didn't erase what had happened, but it made it a little easier to move forward, knowing that something good had come out of his ordeal. "They're doing this because of you, Jalen," Tanya said softly, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "You made this happen." Jalen nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "We made this happen." The next few weeks were filled with a strange mix of emotions. Jalen returned to school where his friends welcomed him back with open arms. Teachers were more understanding, and he felt a sense of support he hadn't expected. The media attention died down, and life began to settle back into a more familiar rhythm. One afternoon, Jared came over with a folder of documents. As they sat around the kitchen table, he explained the final terms of the settlement and what it meant for their family. "The financial compensation is significant," he said, looking at Tanya and Jalen. "It's enough to cover legal fees and ensure that Jalen's future is secure. But more importantly, the department has agreed to all the policy changes we requested, including independent oversight. This is a major victory." Tanya glanced at the papers, then back at Jared. "What about the apology?" "It's included in the settlement agreement," Jared confirmed. "They will issue a public apology and acknowledge the harm that was done." Jalen felt a sense of closure as he listened. This wasn't just about the money or the apology. It was about making sure that what had happened to him wouldn't happen to anyone else. "Are you happy with this, Jalen?" Jared asked gently. Jalen nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think it's good. I just want things to be better." Tanya smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "They will be, baby. They will be." As they signed the final documents, Jalen felt a sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing up for what was right and making a difference. The weeks that followed were quieter. Life slowly began to return to normal, but with a newfound sense of purpose and strength. Jalen's story had made an impact, and the changes they had fought for were beginning to take root. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on the front porch, Tanya turned to Jalen, her eyes filled with pride. "You know, you've done something really amazing, Jalen. You've made a difference." Jalen smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I just wanted things to be fair." Tanya nodded, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "And you made that happen. I'm so proud of you." As they sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jalen felt a deep sense of peace and hope. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but he knew he could face them because he wasn't alone. He had his mom, his family, and the knowledge that he had made a real difference. No matter what happened next, he knew he could handle it. Because he was strong, because he was brave, and because he had learned that standing up for what's right was worth every struggle, every fear, and every fight. And that was something he would carry with him, always.